All right, everyone. Angela Merkel's domestic intelligence agency is intentionally monitoring the nationalist right alternative for Germany. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. I'm sure many of you are well aware of the dramatic rise of the nationalist right party, the Alternative for Deutschland, or simply known as the AfD. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, and if not, please smack that bell and subscribe button. It'll be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel. But if you're a regular part of this channel, you'll certainly know about their, well, relatively short but dramatically successful history that's taking German politics really by storm. They first stormed onto the scene in the national election back in September 2017 when they received an astonishing 13% of the vote. Keep in mind, this is the first time they had ever run for national office, and they came in third in a national election, beating out such established parties as the Green Party, FDP, Die Linke, and the like. And of course, the same election was a disaster for Angela Merkel. Her Christian Democratic Union had one of its worst elections since 1949. They barely maintained 30% of the vote. And post-election analysis found that the AfD was siphoning off votes not just from the center-right CDU, but also from the center-left SPD or the Social Democrats. And this was most evident among the industrial and so-called Rust Belt parts of the nation, union workers, who up until now have been very traditionally leftist voting demographic. They've turned en masse to the AfD, largely over the whole issue of immigration. The AfD has since then crippled the center-right Christian Social Union Bavaria and have made extremely significant inroads into the state of Hesse. Indeed, since 2017, the AfD is now represented in all of Germany's 16 states. They've been one of the most dramatically successful nationalist right parties in Europe, and it's just been only a couple of years. And to crown it all, just a couple of months back, a poll was published on Europe Elects, which absolutely shocked the mainstream globalist elites in Germany and indeed throughout Europe, because it showed for the very first time ever that the AfD had in fact surpassed Angela Merkel's Christian Democratic Union to take first place as the single most popular party in Eastern Germany. The nationalist right AfD was polling at around 27% support among Eastern Germans, while the same poll showed that Angela Merkel's CDU had in fact plummeted to 23% support, which is the lowest, as I understand it. It's the lowest polled in the last several decades. Now, the left-wing Social Democrats, or SPD, Merkel's coalition partners, they dropped in that same poll, by the way, to barely 15% support. Now, it appears that Angela Merkel is trying to do something about this. It's being reported that Germany's domestic intelligence agency, also better known, as the secret police, is in fact beginning to monitor what they're calling elements of the AfD. Sorry. We need to report it the way the left-wing British Guardian reports it. They're monitoring elements of the anti-immigration, far-right, xenophobic, extreme right, neo-Nazi, radical right AfD. That's better, you see, because it makes such surveillance so much more palatable, so much more justifiable, right? Now, what's interesting here is that Merkel had gotten rid of the prior head of their domestic intelligence agency precisely because he opposed spying on the AfD. He had challenged Merkel over the whole notion that they were... these whole notion of Nazi manhunts that they wanted to engage in after the Chemnitz rallies back in August. And for him, it was really just a matter of empirical verification. All the corporatist globalist media in Germany, all they were doing is they were screaming and crying about this renewed Nazi threat and Chemnitz. And he said, you know what? Well, I don't see where the evidence is for such fears. And he was completely unconvinced that anything like that was occurring. And so he refused to conduct surveillance as the AfD, which is supposedly at the heart of this renewed neo-Nazi threat. Well, as it turns out, Merkel fired him, and now they appear to be doing two things here. First and foremost, The domestic police are, of course, now monitoring AFD, and they're doing so under the old tired rhetoric of the AFD is a threat to democracy and the liberal democratic principles that we hold so dear and which define our constitutional way of life, blah, 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 blah. Of course, overlooking that the entire EU project is overseen by a bunch of bureaucrats who are themselves appointed, not elected. But forget that. We have bigger fish to fry, and that's stamping out domestic threats, right? Everybody's a terrorist, so now we get to terrorize them, right? So that's the first thing that's going on here. But secondly, as I understand it, if German domestic intelligence labels a group as extremist in an official capacity, like they're threatening to do with the AfD, that then would bar all lawyers, teachers, government employees from ever joining or having anything whatsoever to do with the Conservative Nationalist Party. I mean, this is really, really extreme stuff here. It's so ironic that in the name of combating extremism, these center, left, center, right globalist parties are going to such extreme measures, right? This is what Jimmy Atkinson of the Nationalist Right Sweden Democrats pointed out in his awesome speech before the floor of the Riksdag, the Swedish parliament. In the name of keeping the Sweden Democrats out of the new government, even though they won almost 20% of the vote, I mean, they're a brand new party, and they were performing electorally right up there with century-old mainstream parties, right? So even though Swedish voters voted overwhelmingly for a new government and by implication a new prime minister, in the name of keeping the far-right Sweden Democrats out of any governing coalition, the politicians in the Riksdag actually went so far as to restore the old center-left government and reinstate the old Prime Minister Stefan Löfven. We have a great video on that if you're interested, featuring Jimmy Atkinson's defiance of such an extremist move on the part of the Swedish parliament. You'll want to check that out. Very, very cool. He's a great speaker. So in the name of combating extremism, supposed extremism, we're seeing the globalist liberals going actually quite extreme, and they're doing so now, it appears, with the AfD. Now, in terms of response, we have to understand that this whole notion that the AfD and the nationalist right as a whole throughout Europe, this whole notion that they're anti-democratic is patently false. And we have the studies, not a bunch of unsubstantiated slander, but actual studies to prove it. Eatwell and Goodwin, they document in their book on the rise of nationalist populism throughout Europe and here in the United States that back in 2017, Pew Research found across Europe and across the United States that an average of 90% of their population saw democracy as a good way of governing their countries. A World Values Survey found the exact same, more or less, the same totals. And the supermajority of Europeans, which other studies have found to include at least 25 to 30% committed nationalist populists, feel very, very good about democracy. In fact, they want more democracy, not less. They want more referendums. They want more politicians who are actually going to listen to their concerns and who will in turn give more power to the people and less power to established economic and political elites. Nationalist populists are far more interested in direct democracy rather than the kind that derives from Brussels, which so often overrides the concerns of the populations of sovereign nations. Democracy isn't going anywhere, especially with the AfD. What is going to be cast out is what's called pragmatic democracy. That we can be sure of that the AfD wants nothing to do with. Again, Eatwell and Goodwin make the very helpful distinction here between what we call redemptive democracy on the one hand and pragmatic democracy. Redemptive and pragmatic. Pragmatic democracy is the kind of democracy that operates within globalist world structures. It's based on the pragmatism. That's the key. It's based on the pragmatism of the technocratic expertise of a ruling class of experts and technocrats, an aristocratic elite whose values are often fundamentally different from that of the people they claim to represent. That's very, very important to get. The kind of pragmatism practiced by political and economic elites within so-called democratic structures have little, if anything, to do with the concerns of the majority of national populations. Pat Buchanan pointed this out in one of his latest columns. He notes that President Trump was not elected by what he calls the old Republican litany of tax cuts and conservative judges and increased defense spending. Trump was elected on securing the borders, extricating America from our foolish foreign wars, eliminating trade deficits with NAFTA nations, the EU and China, making allies pay their fair share of the common defense, renewing our manufacturing base, and getting along with Russia. These are all issues that the globalist elite, the practitioners of pragmatic democracy, quite literally care nothing about. They don't care about borders. They don't care about the national specificity of trade agreements or NATO contributions. They don't care about China. They don't care about the proxy wars and the military presence throughout the world, right? And they sure as heck don't want to have anything to do with the anti-globalist antics of a renewed orthodox Russia, except, of course, if you're talking about a gas pipeline stretching over to Germany, right? then Russia's okay. The key here is that the nationalist populists, like the AfD, they are for what we call redemptive vision of democracy, which restores democratic rule and institutions to act congruently in accordance with the values of the population, protecting the rights of citizens, the citizens of a nation, as well as its culture, its customs, and traditions, and seeks to rid the nation as much as possible of corrupt and distant political elites and undemocratic rule from above. This is the whole notion of democracy that is animating and inspiring the nationalist populist movements throughout Europe, and most especially the AfD. The irony, of course, is that according to our globalist elites like Angela Merkel, only pragmatic democracy is allowed, because it's pragmatic democracy that keeps power in their hands and away from you. How very democratic of them. No? So, of course, be keeping our eyes on this whole situation, doing our own form of monitoring. And in the end, I think, again, it's just too little, too late. The nationalist, populist, redemptive, democratic genie is out of the bottle, and there's simply no way for pragmatic globalists to put it back. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Click on either our Patreon or Subscribe Star or our PayPal links below and become a supporter of this channel and help us to continue to analyze current events in light of awesome conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.